She stood quietly in the marble hallway, her heels still, her posture calm. Executives walked past her without a glance. Some whispered, some smirked, some laughed behind the closed boardroom doors. To them, she was just another outsider who didn't belong. They joked about her being early. They assumed she was lost. They assumed wrong. What they never imagined was this. The woman they kept waiting owned 51% of the company they were so proud of, and in less than 5 minutes, the same room that echoed with laughter would fall silent. As power shifted, masks dropped, and careers ended with a single sentence. Ariana Freeman wasn't just visiting the office that morning. She was walking back into the place where her dreams had once kept her awake at night. The company she built from nothing but faith, grit, and long, lonely hours no one ever saw. Years ago, when the business was fragile and uncertain, Ariana had chosen to stay behind the scenes. She believed in empowering others, in letting leadership grow while she focused on expansion. From quiet hotel rooms and late-night flights, she took the company global, signing deals, opening markets, and securing the 51% stake that kept her vision alive. But power, when left unattended, forgets where it came from. Sitting outside the boardroom, Ariana watched through the glass as executives laughed, clinked coffee cups, and whispered strategies that didn't include her name. No one checked the hallway. No one asked who she was. No one cared. In that moment, the truth settled heavily in her chest. They no longer saw her as the founder who had carried the company through its darkest days. To them, she was just a line in a report, a forgotten name, a silent shareholder. And as Ariana sat there, unannounced, unnoticed, she understood something chilling. That silence wasn't an accident. It was a message, and it told her everything she needed to know. Ariana Freeman checked her watch, not out of impatience, but intention. 5 minutes. That was all she allowed herself to wait. Not because she lacked authority, and certainly not because she needed permission. She waited because leadership, when done right, begins with respect. And respect deserves a chance to show up on its own. The hallway hummed with quiet privilege. Polished floors, framed awards, the kind of space designed to make people feel important simply for standing in it. Ariana had walked these halls before, back when the carpet was thinner, the walls undecorated, and the future uncertain. Back when every decision carried risk and every success felt borrowed from tomorrow. Now, she sat calmly in a chair no one offered her, hands folded, spine straight. Inside the boardroom, the laughter grew louder. She could hear fragments through the glass. Jokes about quarterly numbers, casual complaints about optics, a dismissive comment about how the old leadership model was outdated. Someone even joked about how easy it was to run a company once the original dreamers were out of the way. Ariana didn't flinch. She waited. 1 minute passed. An assistant walked by, glanced at her, and looked away. No greeting, no question, just a quick assumption made and filed away. She doesn't matter. 2 minutes. A junior executive exited the boardroom briefly, phone pressed to his ear. He stepped around Ariana as if she were furniture. Not even a nod. 3 minutes. The laughter inside turned sharper. Confident. Careless. The sound of people who believed the room belonged to them. For minutes, Ariana felt something settle inside her. Not anger, not hurt, but clarity. The kind that arrives when excuses run out. She had given them time. She had given them space. She had trusted that professionalism would do what contracts and titles often fail to do. It didn't. At the 5-minute mark, the boardroom door opened again. This time, a senior executive glanced directly at her. His eyes skimmed her tailored suit, her calm expression, her unreadable presence. "Can I help you?" he asked. Not unkindly, but without curiosity, without respect. "I'm here for the board meeting," Ariana replied evenly. He smiled, a thin curve that didn't reach his eyes. "The meeting's already started. You'll need to wait, or reschedule through admin." She nodded once. "I see." And just like that, he turned his back and closed the door. Dismissed, ignored, treated like she didn't belong in the very space she had created. That was the moment something fundamental shifted. This wasn't just rude. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was evidence. Proof that arrogance had replaced integrity. That power, left unchecked, had grown comfortable enough to forget its roots. That the people entrusted with her vision no longer felt accountable to it, or to her. Ariana didn't raise her voice. She didn't knock on the door. She didn't demand recognition. Instead, she stood. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to signal that waiting was over. She walked to the reception desk and calmly asked for the company's secretary by name. The same woman who had signed Ariana's majority shareholder documents years ago, hands shaking with excitement at the future they were building together. Within seconds, the energy shifted. Whispers replaced laughter. Phones came out. The secretary's eyes widened when she saw Ariana. "Miss Freeman? We weren't informed." "That's okay," Ariana said gently. "Please inform the board that I'll be joining them now." There was no hesitation this time. The boardroom doors opened fully, not casually, but urgently. Conversations died mid-sentence. Chairs scraped. Faces turned pale as recognition spread, slowly at first, then all at once. The kind of realization that hits like cold water. We've made a mistake. Ariana stepped inside. She didn't sit immediately. She stood at the head of the table, the seat she once avoided to let others lead. "I waited 5 minutes," she said calmly. "Not because I had to, but because I wanted to see who you've become." No one spoke. She looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes, not with fury, but with disappointment far heavier. "What I saw," she continued, "was a leadership team more concerned with comfort than character, more interested in control than accountability." She paused. "So let me be clear." Ariana placed a folder on the table. "This isn't a meeting anymore." The silence thickened. "This," she said, voice steady, "is an intervention." And in that moment, every executive in the room understood the truth. Those 5 minutes didn't just change everything. They revealed everything. Without knocking, Ariana walked into the boardroom. The sound of her heels against the polished floor cut straight through the laughter. 1 second, the room was alive with confidence, smiles, side conversations, careless jokes. The next, it fell into a stunned, suffocating silence. Chairs stopped mid-shift. Coffee cups hovered in the air. Words died before they could be finished. Every face turned toward her. At first, confusion flickered across their expressions. Then curiosity. And finally, recognition. It spread slowly, like a shadow moving across the table. Someone swallowed hard. Another executive's smile collapsed. A third straightened his tie as if it could protect him. Because now they knew. Ariana Freeman didn't announce herself. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand attention. She simply walked to the head of the table and pulled out the chair that had once been hers, the founder's chair. The room seemed to hold its breath as she sat down. That single movement did more than any speech ever could. They had mistaken her absence for weakness. They had assumed distance meant disengagement. They believed silence meant surrender. They were wrong. Ariana folded her hands on the table, her gaze calm, steady, unflinching. This wasn't the look of someone seeking approval. It was the look of someone who had already made a decision. "I find it interesting," she said at last, her voice even controlled, "how quickly a room forgets who built it." No one responded. She glanced around the table, at the executives who once begged her for guidance, who once praised her vision in private while slowly dismantling it in practice. People she had trusted, people she had empowered. "I listened outside," Ariana continued, "long enough to hear jokes about outdated leadership and comments about how easy things become when the founders disappear." Her eyes settled on one man near the center of the table. He avoided her gaze. "Let me clarify something," she said. "I didn't disappear. I stepped back. There's a difference." The tension grew heavier by the second. The confidence that once filled the room cracked under the weight of her presence. Hands that had signed reckless decisions now trembled slightly against the tabletop. Ariana leaned back in her chair, not relaxed, but grounded. "For years, I trusted you with my vision. I believed that if I gave you authority, you would protect the integrity of what we built together." She paused. "Instead, you protected yourselves." A murmur tried to form, but she lifted one hand, just slightly. It was enough to silence the room again. That ends today. She slid a second folder onto the table. This one thicker, heavier. The kind of folder that doesn't carry ideas, but consequences. You mistook my patience for permission, Ariana said, and my absence for ignorance. Her gaze hardened, not with anger, but certainty. I own 51% of this company. That means every decision made in this room ultimately answers to me. That was when it truly hit them. Not as a concept, not as a rumor, but as reality. They weren't sitting with a symbolic founder. They were sitting across from the woman who could end their careers with a sentence. Ariana stood, resting her hands on the table, leaning in just enough to make her presence unavoidable. Power doesn't announce itself, she said quietly. It waits. It watches. And when the moment comes, it reminds you who's in control. No one dared speak, because the door hadn't just opened. Power had shifted. Ariana didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room was already silent, hanging on every breath, every movement of her hands as she opened the first folder. Inside weren't accusations or emotional pleas. There were documents, numbers, timelines, signatures, facts. For months, Ariana began calmly. This company has bled value, not because of the market, but because of decisions made in this room. She slid a page forward, then another. Their arrogance was laid bare first. Emails where executives mocked staff concerns. Private messages dismissing compliance warnings. Meeting notes where ethics were labeled inconvenient and accountability was treated like a nuisance rather than a responsibility. Ariana let them see themselves. Next came negligence. Reports ignored. Risk assessments buried. Whistleblower complaints quietly rerouted and erased. Projects rushed through approvals without oversight, all to inflate short-term bonuses while long-term damage was quietly accepted. You knew, Ariana said, her voice steady, and you chose comfort over responsibility. No one interrupted her. No one could. Then she opened the final section of the folder. This one changed the air in the room. Bank transfers highlighted in yellow. Shell accounts traced across borders. Numbers that didn't belong where they appeared. A web of quiet financial manipulation, clever enough to hide in plain sight, arrogant enough to assume no one was watching closely. Ariana looked up. I didn't step back from this company, she said. I stepped back so I could see it clearly. Faces drained of color. A man near the end of the table shook his head slightly, as if denial might rewrite reality. Another executive opened his mouth, then closed it again when he realized there was nothing left to say. Ariana closed the folder. There's a moment, she continued, when leadership has to choose between loyalty and truth. She stood. I choose truth. Her eyes moved slowly around the table, meeting each gaze once. Not to intimidate, but to acknowledge that this moment would follow them for the rest of their lives. Then she said the words that rewrote everything. You are all terminated. Effective immediately. The sentence landed without drama. No shouting. No insults. No celebration. Just consequence. Within seconds, the doors opened. Security entered. Not aggressively, not theatrically. Calm. Professional. Prepared. Phones buzzed all at once. Email access revoked. Company accounts locked. Keycards deactivated in real time. Power stripped away faster than it had ever been gained. Some executives sat frozen. Others stood slowly, faces tight with disbelief. A few tried to speak, but the words died in their throats as security waited patiently beside them. Ariana watched quietly. This wasn't revenge. It was responsibility. As the last executive was escorted out, the boardroom felt larger, lighter, cleaner. Ariana remained standing at the head of the table, alone now, surrounded by empty chairs and the echo of a culture that no longer existed. Power doesn't beg. It doesn't argue. It doesn't explain itself endlessly. Power acts. And that day, in that boardroom, it did. But this story was never about revenge. If it were, Ariana would have walked away the moment the boardroom emptied. She would have let the damage speak for itself. Instead, she stayed because what mattered most had never been the executives. It was the people. As news of the termination spread, fear rippled through the building. Employees whispered in hallways. Desks went quiet. People worried about layoffs, about pensions, about whether the company they had given years of their lives to was about to collapse. That's when a mid-level employee stepped forward. Not a vice president, not a board member, just someone who had stayed late, followed the rules, and believed the company still stood for something. Hands trembling, voice unsteady, they revealed the truth. There had been a secret plan designed not to save the company, but to strip it, to tank its public image, manipulate stock movement, and profit quietly while employees paid the price. Ariana listened without interrupting, without judgment, without ego. When the story ended, she nodded once. "I know," she said softly. "That's why I came back." That single sentence changed everything. Ariana moved quickly, but carefully. She halted the plan, secured the company's finances, and protected every job that had been put at risk. Departments were restructured, not erased. Trust was rebuilt, not demanded. Then she called a company-wide meeting. Standing before hundreds of employees, some nervous, some skeptical, some simply exhausted, Ariana spoke without a script. "This company doesn't belong to greed," she said. "It belongs to the people who show up every day and give it life." She didn't promise miracles. She promised something rarer: stability, respect, leadership rooted in integrity. She promised transparency instead of fear, accountability instead of silence, a future where no one would be invisible again. For a moment, the room was quiet. Then someone clapped, then another, until the applause rose, not loud at first, but sincere, relieved, grateful. Fear softened into hope. Silence transformed into trust. And as Ariana looked out at the people she had protected, she knew the company had been saved, not just on paper, but at its heart. They thought power lived in titles and boardrooms, but they were wrong. True power lives in respect, in accountability, in knowing when to stand up for what you built. Ariana didn't reclaim her company with anger. She reclaimed it with clarity. Because leadership isn't about being seen every day. It's about being remembered when it matters most.